going to devastate our economy. Tourism, construction, agriculture. I mean, you're going to have vegetables rotting in the fields. You're going to have construction sites that will lie dormant, or certainly will struggle to get workers to be able to help make sure that they can make progress. The tourism and restaurant industry in particular, rely on these workers.
I love when they just get honest about it. Hey, if we don't let the illegals in, who's going to pick the agriculture? Joining me now, Steve Cortes. He's the founder of the League of American Workers. He also does work with the Ron DeSantis PAC. Steve, without these illegals, who's going to clean my hotel room?
Right, exactly. And by the way, American citizens might actually see their wages rise if we had control of the border and if we didn't invite in millions of illegal workers at a time when real wages are already crashing for regular American citizens. But it's interesting and almost funny, if it weren't such a tragic situation on the ground, when those on the left will actually reveal themselves. And by the way, will reveal that what they accuse us of is actually 100% accurate. What I mean by that is the great replacement theory, right? They claim that is an utterly racist philosophy that's based in nonsense, that it's a myth. And then they come out and say, oh, no, we absolutely want to replace you. And we want to replace you with much lower cost workers. Why? Because we think it's going to be good for us politically. We think they're going to vote for us. And because our big business allies want cheap labor more than they care about the country.
Steve, one of the things that's wild about things like E-Verify is that it's controversial at all. Don't right. Hire illegal immigrants. That's a basic thing that it shouldn't even be left or right. Democrat, Republican, a sovereign nation doesn't fill itself up with illegal immigrants. Yet we're a nation that does and has for a very, very long time. What does that say about us?
Yeah. And listen, you're right. We have, by the way, particularly since the 1980s, Ronald Reagan, a man I incredibly admire. To me, by far, the biggest failing of his presidency was the 1986 amnesty. Until that time, we had some illegal immigration, but it was nothing like now. It wasn't the kind of systemic problem that plagues the United States. But ever since then, since we said to an entire swath of illegals, we're going to make you American citizens, and we're going to sort of forget about the fact that you broke and entered into our country. Ever since then, we have been plagued by this problem. In part, though, you're exactly right, Jesse, because let's face it, powerful interests and powerful people in America, they may claim that they like the idea of a border, but the reality is they do not, because big business CEOs and Democratic Party chieftains who are intensely and closely aligned, they have fused power together. They both believe it is in their self-interest to invite in millions of unvetted and uninvited illegal migrants into the United States, because big business gets the cheap labor they want, and those Democratic chieftains believe that they're going to get the voters. I say believe, by the way, because I'm not so sure ultimately the way Hispanics in America, thankfully, are moving to the right. But E-Verify should not be controversial at all. I'm very glad, by the way, one of the reasons that I'm advocating for Ron DeSantis in the Republican primary is what he just did in the state of Florida, the bill that he passed regarding immigration in Florida. Now, immigration should primarily be a federal issue. The states are limited in what they can do. But what Ron DeSantis decided to do is crack down, say in this state, employers, you are going to use E-Verify. And if you don't, you're going to face very severe penalties. He also said to the citizens of Florida, don't even transport an illegal around the state of Florida, or you will face stiff criminal penalties for doing so. And he also told every location, particularly some of the more liberal blue locations within Florida, you're not going to issue any government IDs to illegal migrants, as happens regularly in places like New York and Illinois and California. So he's doing everything he can, everything within state power, to crack down on this scourge of illegal migration. And I think it's a blueprint for other states. And I believe it's one of the reasons that he'll be a good president, because, of course, again, this is primarily protection of the border and sovereignty, a federal issue.
Let's talk about legal immigration as well, Steve, because you're hot on this too. These big businesses, they'll walk in. I remember it happened at Disney a few years ago. I believe it was 2000. They had 2,000 workers train their replacements. I think they were from India. They trained the people that were going to replace them. Then they fired the Americans and brought in the foreigners. It's a big problem.
Massive problem, Jesse. I mean, not only just the absolute outrage, right, of replacing American citizens with foreign workers when the American citizens are perfectly capable of doing the job, but the added indignity of having to train and educate your replacement. I mean, it's obscene. Okay, look, I believe personally, and I'm the son of an immigrant. My father came here legally to the United States. I think immigration at times has suited America very well. At times it has not. The left wants us to believe, in the corporate media and big business, they want us to believe that immigration is some good in and of itself. And that's just ridiculous. There are times it makes sense for America. There's times we've done it very well. We've done it very poorly, quite frankly, in recent decades. And as evidence of that, I would point out that in Los Angeles County, the largest county in America, according to the LA Times, not a right-wing news source, the majority of immigrant-headed households in Los Angeles County are in some form of public assistance, are receiving welfare in the United States. What that tells me is we're not doing immigration right now in the United States. We're not correctly filtering who should come in. And I strongly believe, and I'm only speaking for myself now, I strongly believe that it's time for a pause, for a moratorium, that we should say we absolutely have to seal the border and stop illegal migration. But I also believe that even legal immigration, it's time for a pause until we figure out what should be the right filters, what are the right metrics to use to decide who gets into the United States, how many people get into the United States, and we can restart it at some point. And I would argue, Jesse, that we should restart it at a much, much lower level. If you look at the United States right now, we're percentage-wise, we're almost at the highest level we've ever been in foreign-born population. The last time we were this high was way back in the 19 teens. At that time, we had an almost insatiable demand for labor for the Industrial Revolution. And this is critical, Jesse, we had zero safety net, okay? So for those people coming in, it was literally either figure it out or goodbye. And for many of them, by the way, it was goodbye because many of them came here, couldn't quite cut it, didn't like it, whatever, went back. But the point is, there was no infrastructure to support them. We have a totally different situation now, okay? On both of those counts, diametrically opposite. I think that AI and robotics, if anything, are going to be replacing a lot of American citizens in the jobs they now do. And of course, we have an incredibly generous safety net, even for illegal migrants, in some cases, especially for them. So all of that tells me illegal immigration, we have to be absolutely zero tolerance. But I want to make the case from the right, from the populist right, that even legal immigration right now to the United States doesn't make sense.
Oh, I agree. And look, the debt. Let's talk about inflation really, really briefly. On top of all of our other problems, illegal immigration flooding into the country, the value of our money is going bye-bye, and they're getting ready to jack interest rates again. We're a long ways away from 2% inflation rate, Steve, which means those interest rates aren't going to stop rising anytime soon. There is a severe recession coming.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and by the way, I think for middle and lower income America, they're already in that recession. And certainly that's what they self-report. According to Fox News polls, 70% of the American people say that the economy is getting worse for their family. According to a Wall Street Journal poll, this was even worse, I think, looking at the big picture. They said, are your children going to be better off than you? 78% of the American people said their children will not be better off than they are. That is by far the worst mark in the history of that survey, which we've been doing for decades. But why? You mentioned it. It's because of inflation. So we are suffering the worst inflation since the 1970s. And I think on many metrics, the economy is actually worse off now than the 1970s because back then, Jesse, we didn't have this debt. We didn't have this stifling debt. So we had a lot of problems in the 70s. We had out of control inflation, but we still made things here. We still had a manufacturing base in the United States, and we were still a creditor nation. The opposite now, right? We have offshored, because of the globalists, we have offshored so much of our productive capacity. We are massively in debt, now well north of $32 trillion and counting. And Joe Biden, instead of saying, okay, the crisis of the pandemic's over, and we made massive mistakes during the crisis, but that's spilled milk at this point, right? But instead of saying, that's over, we can't keep spending that way, we should be going back to at least 2019 levels, he's unwilling to even go back to 2022 levels. I mean, think of that. So he still wants what caused the inflation, the very fire that stoked this inferno. He wants to further pour gasoline upon it and stay above 2021 and 2022 levels of spending. And I fear, Jesse, if we stay on this trajectory, and I really mean this, I'm not trying to be too alarmist, but I think this is a reality. People can't afford the staples in their lives. We risk some actual societal upheaval if we continue along this track, because regular working class people, forget about the luxuries, they can't pay for the staples right now.
Oh. Steve, appreciate you, man. Come back soon.
You bet. Thank you, Jesse.
I have great news. If you enjoyed that, I have a YouTube channel you can subscribe to. Whatever I do, it'll be right there on YouTube. So go subscribe today.